Hello, today is Thursday, November 19th, 2020. My name is Evan Solis. I'm interviewing Damian Pantoja for the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. Please know, Mr. Pantoja, that this interview will be placed in the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection at UT Austin. If there's anything you do not wish to answer or talk about, I will honor your wishes. Also, if there's something you want to talk about that I don't mention, please bring it up and we'll talk about it. Okay. Because we are not conducting this interview in person, I need to record you consenting. So I'm going to ask you a series of 5 questions. Please say, yes, I agree, or no, I do not agree after each one. And there are 2 questions we need to make sure you agree to before we go on. 1, Voces wishes to archive your interview along with any other photographs and other documentation at the Benson Library at UT Austin. We will retain copyright of the interview and any other materials you donate to Voces. Do you give Voces consent to archive your interview and your materials at the Benson Library?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Do you grant Voces copyright over the interview and any material you provide?
Yes.
Okay. Do you agree to allow us to post this interview on the internet where it may be viewed by people around the world?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see, and then there's 2 more questions. We have many questions in the pre-interview form that we already filled out. We use that information from the pre-interview form to help in our research. The entire form is kept in a secure Voces server. Before we send this to the Benson, we would have stripped out any contact information for yourself or family members, so that will not be part of your public file. Your public file will only be accessible at the Benson Library. Do you wish for us to share the rest of your interview and your public file available to researchers at the Benson?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's a big, it's a mouthful, it's complicated, but, and the last question, excuse me?
I followed along.
Okay, and then the last question, on occasion, Voces receives requests from journalists who wish to contact our interview subjects. We only deal with legitimate news outlets. Do you give consent for us to share your phone numbers or your email with journalists?
Sure.
Oh, completely up to you. Okay, great. All right, so that's the technical legal part. Okay, Damian, so this is part of a Voces of a Pandemic project, so we're trying to document the Latino experience, the experience of Latinos and Latinas during this pandemic. But before that, we'd like to just get some general information to know about you. Can you tell us a bit about where you're from, what your family is like, just sort of some general, background on you as a person?
Yeah. My name is Damian Pantoja, born and raised here in Austin, and specific to Southeast Austin, the Montopolis and Riverside corridor area. I am the first natural born Mexican American in my family. My family did migrate from Coahuila, Mexico in 76, making Austin, East Austin, their home. And then when they were able to become homeowners, may purchase their home off the Montopolis area, raise a family, and then I came along and grew up in the area. And I currently now live in the area still to this day. So do my grandparents. My parents did leave the area. They went further east. My mom was a teen mom. She did have me her senior year of high school at Austin High. But that did not stop her or the family for her to pursue her goals and her dreams. There's a lot of support to ensure that she had resources. So when it came down to me having resources, we relied on public education, on the community, on each other, essentially, whether it be our neighbors, our physical neighbors, or just our neighbors at church. We helped each other out at the end of the day. So that kind of stayed with me as I got older, that sense of community where you reach out when you need help and you help each other out when they're in need, and not in need in the sense where it has to be a bad thing. If someone's just going through a hard day, stop by with a pastry of some sort or just some sort of gesture just to have that conversation. So that's a little about my upbringing, a little bit more about me. went to school, went to college, finished my undergraduate at St. Mary's University. Came back home because it's in San Antonio. Came back home, and about St. Mary's, it's a Marinus Institute, so it's Catholic. What's so unique about Marinus Institute is it's very community mindset, and it looking back now as post college, working in rural in corporate America and advocating and volunteering my time now, I think I didn't realize how much volunteer work I did in college. And that was just because of the culture at that university. And that's where it began, where I become understanding that I wanted to be a community leader. So after graduation, I took a couple roles, and in the last 3 years now, I've been blossoming, or at least try to blossom where I'm rooted here in the Metropolis Southeast area. Going back to what I said earlier about being there for one another, given that we're in a pandemic, I'm healthy. I'm very fortunate that I'm healthy. I'm fortunate that I've had experiences and resources due to my community, my family. And I want to ensure that during this pandemic, our neighbors have access to resources or to information, not just necessarily PPE, but for example, the Austin rent assistance. That's something I always share with individuals, because people don't know and people are not aware. And I think that's what's happening right now in this world, in this area, in the area of Southeast Austin. Since I'm very immersed within the community, people constantly ask me how they can have access to whatever resource that they're missing. And I'm just constantly sharing that with them. And it goes back when I was younger, when I was always told, always help everyone out. And it also doesn't help that I'm the oldest of 6. So I was constantly being that helper, whether it be with my dad or my mom. I was always helping them to help my younger siblings.
So well, there's a lot of things I could follow up on, but just since you're talking so much about this community that you're rooted in, that you've been rooted in, can you describe, for someone who's listening to this, who doesn't know Austin, doesn't know a lot about Austin, can you describe this community that you're part of, the Southeast Austin, Montopolis area? What is that community like? What are sort of the demographics? Just how would you describe that part of Austin?
Yeah, so growing up, it is predominantly Latino, Hispanic, Mexican, Chicano. It is predominantly a lot of working class immigrants, not necessarily immigrants undocumented. We do have residents, neighbors, community members are undocumented, but there are a good chunk of the community that are documented, but still like to live under the radar. I have family members who are U.S. citizens, not by natural birth, but do live under the radar. They unfortunately don't vote because they don't want to be put on the radar. They're not registered to vote because they don't want to be put on the radar. They understand the consequences of not doing their taxes, so they do their taxes. But if it was up to them, they wouldn't, because they want to be under the radar. So there's and it has a lot to do with just being misinformed a lot. For example, like with voting, they have the mentality of your vote does not matter when it does. I've had to advocate that a lot. So we have this community here in the Southeast Austin that's older, that had to overcome a lot of struggles and a lot of challenges, a lot of barriers, a lot of discriminations and stigmas. For example, one that I carry close with me is I'm very fortunate that I'm fluent in 2 languages. There's people that are my age, that are not fluent because their parents were afraid of the stigmas that they received. To them, speaking Spanish in a public setting was frowned upon, was unheard of, was not something that you did because it was not welcoming. However, my grandparents only speak Spanish, and in order for me to communicate with my grandparents, I had to learn the language. I had to speak to them in Spanish. So I'm very thankful that my parents showed me the value of what it is to speak another language other than the English, other than language in my classroom. Um, I mean, even at that, I was discriminated in school in my early days for speaking Spanish in school, but that did not stop me from speaking Spanish in school, speaking Spanish at home, because again, my parents were fluent in both languages. They came to this country at 3. Um, and I wanted to ensure that not just my grandparents, but also the neighbors, going back to what I said about, that resident, it was predominantly Latino. And a lot of the older generations only speak Spanish. And so in order for me to converse and immerse myself with the community, I had to speak the language that they did. A lot of people, I think a lot of people did not finish high school. So there's a lot of misinformation and there's a lot of disconnect. And it has a lot to do with them not being aware on how to find information because they were not given the tools, or they were not shown how to find the tools and how to find the resources. And that kind of has a trickle effect of today on just being aware of the current pandemic, the current climate. They weren't given the tools on what to do. And now we're playing catch up. That's what's happening. It's very Catholic in this area. So we're very family mindset. I do have a lot of neighbors. I graduate with a lot of people, and to this day, I am a Del Valle trustee. So I see a lot of my students kind of still stay within the area because mom and dad are staying, grandpa stayed. It's kind of the norm to stay and either try to find a college in the area. In the city of Austin, we have the University of Texas, which people do go to, but they commute from home as opposed to going on campus and having that college experience. That's something I was able to do because my parents kind of pushed me out, which I'm very thankful for. But the area that I'm in is very Catholic. It is Catholic. It's very Latino, very family oriented, very has a big sense of community. We kind of rely on each other. And the city is evolving. The city is evolving, and our residents here are having a hard time catching up, not just from an economic standpoint, but during a pandemic. They're having a really hard time on understanding what to do right now. And it just trickles back to what I said earlier. A lot of these folks came from a different country, came from a different part of the world, and had to overcome so many challenges on their own that they became very sheltered within their small within their bubble, that now trying to reteach them new information on new ways of living it's been challenging.
So what has specifically now over the past nearly seven or 8 months or so with this crisis here in Austin, how would you say you first got involved in community organizing, community work, specifically as a response to COVID, to this year's crisis, and just what does that look like for you? How did that process start for you? How has it evolved? What are your reflections on that?
For me, it was a little. I had a platform earlier in the year. Like I said a moment ago, I'm a Del Valle school board trustee. So when COVID was occurring, my immediate concerns, my immediate path to, I wouldn't say a resolution, but a conversation that I was having, a conversation that opened, that's still continuing, is what are we doing for our students? And then when I began to learn on how we can educate our students remotely, then the conversation turned, how can we offset any burden to our families? Because this community is working class, economically disadvantaged. So the parents do rely a lot on I wouldn't say they do rely a lot. The parents do rely on the public system for educational resources. And that is when we started as a district. How did I get involved is, how can we get one-on-one devices to our students? How can we get Wi-Fi to our students? And then we had to take it a step further. Being economically disadvantaged, being a Title I district, which means over 50% of your students are economically disadvantaged. How are we feeding our students? Because that means Title I districts, a lot of our students are depending on the meals that the school district provides. So that means free breakfast and free reduced lunch. So that's 2 meals a day, 5 days a week, out of the 7 days that our students and our families are relying on the district. How are we going to get meals to them during the pandemic? So it first started as a student focus, and then it started as a community resource focus. Thankfully, I sit on a board that we are very proactive within our community. We among the educational district needs, we also include our community goals and needs. And that's where it started for me. And as I began to have these conversations on what our families were needing, and that's where I started educating myself on the Austin rent assistance. I started educating myself on what Austin Public Health is doing on distributing PPE. Now I'm starting to learn, okay, if there is a vaccine, what is the vaccine entail of? What entail of? How can Austin residents receive them, or just first from a trickle down Texas, and from Texas, the Austin region, and from the Austin region, how can our high case communities like Southeast Austin have an opportunity to this vaccine? I know there are guidelines and I wouldn't say, I guess the word I'm looking for is there are, for example, I know first responders and everyone in all the frontline workers in the medical field will be the early ones to receive the vaccine should they have the opportunity to. But then I'm understanding how will the community be, will have that opportunity to gain that vaccine. How would that be distributed within the community? So that's where it started with me. I think your question was, how did I start within the pandemic 8-9 months ago? And as a trustee, it was first focusing on the students. And then from there, it trickled down into the community. Like, oh, parents are not just concerned any longer how their students are being educated. Parents are also concerned, how are they going to eat? How are they going to pay their rent or their mortgage? How are they going to pay the utility bill? Do they have enough masks? Do they have enough disinfectant? Do they have enough and I'm not talking just hand sanitizer. Do they have access to Clorox? Do they have access to any type of bleach, hand soap? And then are they working? If they're not working, again, it's just a revolving door conversation that I'm having to educate myself to help meet the needs of all of not just my smaller community, but the greater community in Southeast Austin.
So I know that AISD also has, I don't know if it's Title I, but I know that I think it's like 40% of their kids are economically disadvantaged. And they, I know, have, to varying degrees of success, they've implemented food pickup programs and mobile hotspots and laptop delivery. Is that what y'all have been able to do as well? How have y'all from the district been able to meet those material needs that you were first talking about?
Yes. So in the beginning, we started out with distributing the one-on-one devices. It was a great experience, and then from there, we ended up learning they need connectivity. So then we immediately started handing out hotspots. But then we ran into a roadblock where the thing about Dove Valley ISD, it's a 50-50 split, 50 city, 50 county. And so the county portion, a good chunk of it is rural, which means they don't have, it's not having internet, it's not accessible. As easy as if you lived in the city. However, the city, like I said earlier, we're a working class community, especially the area that I live in. So just because I have access to Wi-Fi, or my community has access to Wi-Fi or internet services, doesn't mean they can afford the internet services because due to the pandemic. So that may be a bill that they had to eliminate. So instead of cherry picking who picked what across the district, we went ahead and just implemented we went ahead and offered hotspots to everyone. We went ahead and offered um, buses with Wi-Fi. So we went ahead and just during the day, they're scattered. They are placed within. They're strategically placed within the district, within the school district. So family members can go near who live nearby or can go to them, have access to Wi-Fi. We went ahead and also created a mobile library. So throughout the week, different parts of the district will have a mobile library should they want to check out a book. And that bus is also, it's a bus, that bus was also equipped with Wi-Fi. So if they want to spend an hour or two there with their parent or with their guardian, they can. Again, it's kind of just keeping our librarians, because they're a resource for our students, in front of our community. And as for meals, all of our districts we did do a meal delivery. So the bus routes will be dropping off meals at the bus stops, and all campuses are equipped during breakfast and lunch to do a pickup. Pick up in the morning for their breakfast, and if they want to come back for lunch, but there's also an option where you can do a one-stop shop, where if you're coming in the morning and you need your lunch, we'll go ahead and give you those brown bags for lunch as well. So you're getting your breakfast and your lunch. And then even into the weekend, on Fridays, we traditionally give you at least meals going up to Sunday, just so no one's going hungry. Importantly, our students, they need that food and nutrition going into the weekend, because we don't have bus routes over the weekend. So at least on campuses or on the bus routes, we can provide you those meals going into the weekend. So on Monday, you at least are fed. What else have we done? There are organizations like the Junior League, I can't think of the organization, not the Women League, it's the junior one. They partner with our district, and they will, right before the election, they were at one of our middle schools. So they do partner with our schools and also distribute meals themselves on top of the meals that we provide. So in some cases, there's some families at some campuses that will get the double meals should they go to the campus, because they'll get it from us and they'll get it from them.
So one of the things you mentioned earlier, talking about this community, you mentioned the fact that it's a hotspot, that there's high case rates in your area, in your community. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Can you just sort of walk us through what, it's all right if you don't have the exact numbers, but just, from your perspective, what does that look like? What does that mean that y'all are a hotspot, and how has that affected your this drive of yours to help the community? Like, how has that evolved over time with the fact that y'all are a hotspot?
Our community, a lot of them are frontline workers, and I don't know the I don't know the exact numbers. And when I say how we're a hotspot from experience, my brother is a frontline worker. He's an essential worker, and he helps my parents out a lot more than I do physically. And it just turned out for him, since they live in the Del Valle area, but just east of this, east from me. That's what I meant to say earlier. And they were impacted by COVID. Currently, they're trying to overcome COVID themselves. And it has a lot to do with putting themselves, our family members and our community members are putting themselves in positions that can't allow them to be at home. So they have to be out and immerse themselves in the world to work, to make ends meet. And it could just be a simple passing where I wouldn't say picked up, but they were exposed. They were exposed to the virus, and now my parents were exposed themselves. And so they're having to now quarantine and watch their symptoms, and going through that myself. And I live in the city. I'm on the Metropolis and Riverside area, so I don't live near them. I don't live with them. And so I do the best I can from my distant view. But just knowing that my brother is an essential worker and he was exposed and then he passed on to my parents, that's just one household. Imagine all my other neighbors, if there's that in the community that I live in, there's always that one sibling or that one child that stays home to help their parents. And if that one working income or one of those working incomes is an essential worker, they can then put their entire household at risk. And that is what happened with my family. And that is what's happening in the entire community, is that one person that has to work or that can be working currently is exposing themselves more than everyone else. They're taking it back. And so it's just staying here. And then staying here in the sense we're staying in their household and they're trying to overcome the experience themselves. And that's what's happening, like I said a minute ago, across the community.
What kind of essential worker is your brother?
He's a UPS driver.
Okay. So yeah, so a lot of contact, right? With a lot of folks. So what is that? I mean, just emotionally for you, I know you spoke in the pre-interview and you said that that they're fine, right? You said your brother has maybe gotten a little bit sicker, but nothing too serious, but just like, how has that been for you? And I mean, just emotionally, what is that like for you to
I have to emotionally, I just keep contact with them and check in, kind of stay positive that they're gonna be okay. That's pretty much all I can do right now. And every day I'm asking what they need from me, because I mean, being quarantined, you don't prepare for this. So I have to kind of live wear different hats, not just live my life, my responsible life, do my duties, but also drive out to my parents' house. They live out by Coda, and I live on Riverside Montalba. So when I finish work or when I finish my errands or when I finish my meetings, I have to run their errands, go to the grocery store, pick up their prescription, or pick up whatever need that's required for them, and drive it out to my parents. I mean, I don't mind. It's what needs to happen, and then come on back. So instead of looking at it as a chore, or instead of looking at it as anything negative, I'm kind of just appreciating that I can at least help them the best I can, and I have the ability to. That doesn't mean that my neighbor or the person across the street or down the block has the ability to. That doesn't. They may be experiencing they may not be working, or they may not work as much, or they may not even have a car. Again, I live in the city, so there's folks that rely on public transportation, and if their parents lived outside the city, how are they going to support their parents from a distance? I can, and I'm able to, and I'm grateful for that. And I think that is where it emotionally hurts me more, is that I want to do more, but given the position that I'm in with my own family and the community, I can't.
Do you think, so just keeping it on this personal level, do you remember sort of when you started to take this pandemic seriously? You talk about you're thinking about your duty and just making sure that you're doing things right. So do you remember, was there a moment or something earlier this year that made you think like, oh, wow, this is actually, I need to take this seriously. This is something that, that is important. Was there anything like that for you?
No, in the beginning, when I believe it was March 13th, right? It was March 13th, that Friday. It was that weekend right before spring break when I started reading about it, learning more about how serious this pandemic is. I mean, this virus is at the time, before it became the global pandemic. I took it serious when we had that lockdown in the beginning. I know that during spring break or towards the end of March, early April, when we kind of just, the city shut down, I stayed home. I also didn't have a haircut for the 3 months that we didn't do anything. And I did it because I'm asthmatic. I'm very easily asthmatic. So is my brother. At the time, I was living with my brother. It was him and I, and um, his daughter only came to visit us once that time. We kind of decided not to because she's also asthmatic. And since he was considered an essential worker, he was working. I knew the risk at the time living with him, but I had said it's just you and I. So worst case, you and I just will figure this out on our own. But I did not, I didn't leave. I didn't do any gatherings. I took it very serious. And then when I did decide to move out, I decided to move on my own, live by myself. I wanted to make sure that I am not putting anyone else at risk. And then even when now that I am working, I am in public view. I don't do gatherings. I go to work, come home. I still do the Zoom calls with my friends. I'll pick up food. I won't eat at a restaurant if I am going to get something to eat out. I'm still taking those caution steps as I was doing earlier in the year. Um, so there was never a point where I thought it was never serious.
So you said in the pre-interview that you had lost your job due to COVID. Can you talk about that? What that situation was?
Yeah. So I previously was working for a solar manufacturing company. My specific role was the residential installations. And when COVID hit at the beginning of, when it started to become a topic of conversation in February, a lot of homeowners at the time um, were very skeptical of making an investment because going solar is an investment. Not anyone just has 30 to 60K laying around to buy solar panels. So a lot of folks were financing these systems. It's like buying a second car or third car. And there was a big decline in sales at the time. So there was weeks where we were not selling contracts. So that was having a domino effect. As we were installing the systems, previously we would get new contracts in the pipeline, but from I was let go early April, from middle February to the time I was let go, there was no new contract. My pipeline was just getting smaller and smaller. And that was because people were just afraid of making that investment. Because they knew, homeowners knew that something was going to happen, and making that investment was a risk. So as we were first getting phone as a company, we kind of were working from home in the beginning, and then they had said there's going to be conversations that we're going to take a pay cut. And then they started saying we're going to do some furloughs and layoffs depending on the position and the need. And I knew my department was gonna lay off a few folks. How many? I don't know. Who? I don't know, because I wasn't the only one in that position. It was all of us in that position where our pipelines were getting smaller. We were just not seeing those contracts anymore being signed and on the path to an installation. So when the call came to let me go, instead of being reactive, I just in the moment just accepted it and went through the process and did what I had to do to end that relationship. And the silver lining to that was my job was able to provide me my insurance still. And because of the pandemic, and due to, it wasn't just me, it was quite a bit of people that were just getting let go week over week. And emotionally, that was, I would say, concerning, because at that point, what was I going to do to live? how was I going to pay my bills, pay my car, pay my rent? How was I going to sustain the life that I had at the time? And so I learned, I use that as a learning opportunity to just reset my expectations, reset my standard. So instead of looking back on it, dwelling, on how could this happen to me, I just use it to reset everything across the board, reset my mind. And thankfully, I've had the opportunity to save money over my career, and that helped a little bit. That helped a little bit, and now that I'm back in the workforce working again, I'm very thankful for that experience, because it helped teach me that I didn't need some of the things that I needed at the time. And it also didn't help that I was home for almost 4 or 5 months doing nothing, and I couldn't go anywhere, spend any money. So that helped. But and also aside from that, I'm going to school full time. I'm in graduate school right now, being on the board, working. So being let go allowed me to kind of focus on what was important to me. And then I use that time to learn about how this virus can impact the community. And then which allowed me to be more invested within the community the last 8 months, because I've had the time to do so.
So speaking, in that sense of that vein of your involvement with the community, can you talk about the Del Valle Coalition, what that is, and what your involvement with that has been, and just what y'all are doing?
Yeah, of course. So the Del Valle Coalition, and to be honest, I became an active member weeks ago. I don't even think it's been a solid month. I think I am approaching a solid month now. However, I've been engaged with the Valle Coalition. What the Valle Coalition does is, and I can only speak to since I've been actively with the coalition, and from what I've experienced as a board member with the coalition, because I did interact with them as a board member, and I did attend their events. It's a group of individuals who are advocating for Southeast Austin, advocating not necessarily only for COVID resources, but resources overall. Southeast Austin, if you go east of the airport, I mean, that's still considered Austin. East of the airport, east of 183, east of Montopolis, east of Stasny, there are no grocery stores. It's a food desert. The community relies a lot on the gas stations, on the meat markets, the independent meat markets out there, on the taco stands, just to get food and nutrition. The coalition also advocates for health. There's no urgent care. There's no medical facility east of 183, east of 290. This is zip code 78741, 78744. What is there? 25, 23, 17617. Those areas do not have access to medical facilities. They had just built a new fire department, that the area is growing, and the area is growing fast. And for the city just to put in their new fire department off of Elroy Road, just last year, I think they had cut the ribbon just last year, or earlier this year, if not last year, earlier this year, within the year. There are many resources that area does not have, and the Del Valle Coalition is a group of individuals that are advocating just to be heard, just to be seen, to not be overlooked anymore by our elected officials, by organizations that are coming in and wanting to put in those resources. Central Health is going to build facilities out there, but that took a long time. And there are conversations on the asks of them, on the ask of, how is it going to get paid for, or is the tax rate going to go up? who's funding that. Those are those conversations, and that's what the coalition is also doing. They're trying to also ensure that the community is not being taken advantage of by organizations, by elected officials, to just to have the basic needs of these resources, such as a grocery store, such as a medical facility, such as just development, commercial development out there. Like I said, my parents want to go to the grocery store, they're out by Coda. Their options are Riverside, William Cannon, or if they want to venture out, Bastrop. Those are the, at minimum, a 30-minute drive to each location. That's just two from. Now we're talking a 2 to 3 hour grocery trip. And that's just not my parents. That's just, that's the entire Del Valle community. Those are my board members that I sit with, that live out there. They have to come into the city or go into another town just to grocery shop. So that is what the Del Valle Coalition does. They advocate for resources overall. Right now, there's a lot of distribution events for PPE, masks, information at the time, information on how to vote. Before that, information on how to register to vote. But what's being continued at these distribution events, PPE, mask, hand sanitizer, information on renters assistance, information on healthcare, on how to obtain healthcare in English and in Spanish, because it is a predominantly Spanish-speaking community. And like I said, they're all working class. The level of education is mainly high school. There are some college and there are some higher education community members, but predominantly it is high school education. So that's what the Del Valle Coalition does. It's a group of individuals, of strong, passionate individuals that I'm so proud to be affiliated with, that advocate for a much larger community.
Yeah, when I went to that event at Ojeda Middle School, it was pretty apparent that need exists, right? If there were a lot of people coming throughout the morning for the PPE and also for the flu vaccinations that were being given around the back. And so, it's evident that the community feels this need. You're talking about, the fact that y'all are going out and providing a need that should be fulfilled, or because it's not being fulfilled by, local government or state government or whatever. And I guess just what does that, feel like, or what do you attribute that to? Or what are your thoughts, generally speaking, on the fact that y'all are having to step up to fulfill a need that your local governments or your elected officials should be fulfilling?
This goes back to perception. A lot of folks believe that the Del Valle area is a township, but it's not. A lot of folks confuse the ISD with the township. I even get it myself when I say, hey, I live on Montopolis and Riverside, but I'm the trustee for Del Valle. I get the weird look, how you live in the city, that's not Del Valle. I'm like, yes, it is. I can have an Austin zip code and I can be zoned to Del Valle ISD 100%. My address is not shared with AISD. My address is only Del Valle ISD. So a lot of people have this misinformation that Del Valle is its own town. It's not. What's happening is Del Valle sits on two jurisdictions. It sits on city and it sits on county. So the question then comes, who's advocating for this community? Is it the city officials or is it the county officials? And there's a back and forth conversation that happens there all the time. And that's why this really strong group came together and said, no, we need to advocate as the whole group. So if we're going to our county commissioners, we're also needing to go to our city councils, to our city council. We need to be going to both groups. We need to unite both groups, because that is how we are going to get seen. That is how we're going to get heard. Even for me, when I say, hey, like I said, people think that I'm AISD. I'm like, no, I'm in Del Valley. They're like, oh, well, you're in this city council. I'm like, no, I'm in City Council 3, which is predominantly East Austin. So it's at Chavez, 7th Street. Like, I fall under that city council. I don't fall under the Dove Springs, Southeast Austin City Council. So it just goes back to a lot of not want to say misinformation, just perception of what people think the boundary lines are and what people think Del Valley is. Um, so that's why this, like I said, this strong group came together, and they're using other groups. Like when you went to the Ojeda event, the Austin Public Health was there, the Austin Latino Coalition was there. You had the Valle Coalition there. You had other groups that came together because they are recognizing that this community as a whole is part of the city, 1, and 2, we're a community at large. There should be no boundaries to resources. There should be the zip code should not determine what you have access to. So we all came together on McKinney Falls at Ojeda Middle School, and we were there for the rest of Southeast Austin.
What are your, and we sort of touched on this earlier, but just what are your thoughts when you see the Austin Latino Coalition and Paul and them have been very vocal about the statistics, right? That Latinos make up some 30-something% of the population, but we're half of the deaths from COVID. And I guess just what is that? What do you think about that? What does that make you feel? I mean, you're as a Latino person with family members who have been infected with this disease. I mean, just what is that? Does it make you angry? Does it make you sad? I mean, just what enters your mind when you think about that disparity?
What enters is, how can we as a community come together with the data, because the data is there. How can we make our claim more clear that we are overlooked and we don't have access to equitable resources like the rest of the city? The data is there. Like you said, there are community leaders, organizations that make a lot of noise. What is it going to take for someone to see that the data is there and that we are overlooked?
Do you all communicate at all with, and I know you're relatively new there, so maybe, but do you know if y'all are in communication with city government, when you're getting these supplies, for example? Are you reaching out to your city council member for that area, or just, I mean, has there been any communication with Adler, with anybody at the local level?
There is. The issue we run into, though, is the data that's used to identify the need is resident numbers, household numbers. From a high level, from what I was told from an elected official at a community meeting that was open to everyone, there's not enough households or not enough houses. This was just last summer, to implement a grocery store, to implement a medical facility. There needs to be more housing, more rooftops. I think that was the verbiage that was being used, more rooftops. And then when they compare it to 2010 census, it shows that the community was not there. So that's why 2020 census was very important, because we needed to document every single living person in those areas. For then the data to reflect all these people do actually live here. These are the case numbers. This is what's happening currently. This is the need. But it goes back to what I said a few minutes ago. Our community likes to stay under the radar. They're afraid of being visible because they had to overcome challenges, how to overcome barriers, how to overcome obstacles. So it's just a revolving door conversation. Like and I tell this to my own family every single time when they express feelings about certain things. I'm like, have you done this? Have you done that? Oh no, okay, let's do it right now. Did you, at the time when it came down to the census, I called every single family member. Did you fill it? No. Let's do it on the phone. Or let me go over, since all of you are there at grandma's house or Tia's or Theo's house, and let me go and let's do it all together. I know three of my Tias are there. I'll do each other household all in one sitting. So, but that's just me. That's just one person. You know, we would need a whole team of people to get their family members to understand the importance of the census, to use that data to advocate for our need as well.
Are you, so we don't know, you know, we supposedly a vaccine that is functional might, you know, begin mass production relatively soon. We don't know when that's going to be available. We don't know, you know, when things are going to get better from a COVID standpoint. But there's also, I mean, just these long-standing problems that you're talking about: gentrification, undercounting, underrepresentation, and just ignorance of this community and what's happening here. So when you think about the future, the next couple of years for this community, what do you think? Are you optimistic? Are you, I mean, just what do you think about what's going to be coming down the road here for y'all?
I'm very optimistic. It just takes, and I'm glad you used the word the term underrepresentation. I believe that's going to take a leader who's not just a reflection, but who's a representation of the community. I'm very optimistic that things can evolve to meet the needs, and I see that because from my own experience, I had to run a campaign to be reelected for the trustee this past election cycle, and I did win. And I thank the community for that. I thank them for that because I went out and I reminded the community of who I was, where I'm from, and why I'm here. And on election day, it took a family. It took my entire family to advocate. And what would I say? It took key holder members in my family, mainly my grandparents and the older generation, to be in front of their neighbors, in front of their community, and remind them that there is representation on that ballot. There's representation that needs to be met. And we pulled non-voting Latinos who are registered to vote but do not vote every election out this election cycle. So it has a lot to do with them being aware that a reflection of them, that representation is on the ballot, that representation is advocating for them. So I'm optimistic that it can happen because I experienced it. You know, I was able to turn a non-voting area of my school district to come out and vote. 4,000 registered voters, 2,500 people went. That right there to me speaks volume, because historically only half of my 4,000 voters go out and vote. We got an additional 400 people this election cycle because we went out and made it aware that a young Latino, a native, a community member is on the ballot. And that's all they needed to know. That, unfortunately, that's what it came down to it. And we got these additional 400 voters out to vote. So I'm very optimistic that it can turn around.
So, you know, we would love to, if you're willing to include in this, in what's going to be your public file, what people will be able to see, and they'll be able to access this interview and read a transcript, and you know, mostly folks who are doing research on these kinds of issues. But we'd love to include any photos you have that you're willing to share, any documents. So that can be, you know, just personal stuff. If you've got photos of your family, you know, you keep talking about your parents, your grandparents, your brothers, we'd love to include that. Anything related to your campaign, you know, if you have like campaign flyers, PDFs, or even just something that you can take a photo of, anything that, you know, a sign, anything that you think is relevant to what we've talked about here. We would love to include that in your file. Just so you know, I can send you an email, follow-up email, with, you know, what we're looking for. Generally, it's just if you can take a picture of it with your phone, that's good enough for us, is my understanding, but I can double check. But just so you know, we would love to include anything that you're willing to share as far as imagery for this file. But
Yeah, I
that,
mean, I can look at things. I can go look at things and get you copies of items.
Okay, thank you. But yeah, that was, I mean, is there anything that you wanted to add? Anything that you feel that maybe we touched on or that we didn't touch? Anything related to what we've discussed that you think is important that you just want to make a note of, or that you felt was left hanging?
Well, I have a question for you. So we spoke about COVID and we spoke about the Latino community. What I'm surprised that you didn't touch on was, will this impact the Austin, will the pandemic impact the Latino community as Austin grows? We saw other minority groups shift out of the city. Will this happen? Will this push more Latinos out of our city?
Well, what are your thoughts on that? What are your...
I don't know. I don't know. Because like I started earlier in the conversation, the older generation fought many challenges, barriers, and stigmas. And they worked to prove all of those things wrong. Many did. And a lot of them are homeowners. A lot of them own their homes. So will they work to prove that they can stay here as the cost of living goes up during a pandemic? I don't know. I don't know, because at this point we're putting it as the way I look at it as, is someone going to pay their $3,000 to $6,000 tax rate on their home, or they're going to use that money to buy their groceries? So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's because, I mean, the Black population in East Austin it's endangered, right? I mean, there's no question, that they're going to be pushed out. And you mentioned earlier that you've seen that area where you are, where you grew up, that it has changed. Have you seen that sort of stark gentrification? I mean, does it, when you look at your community, does it stand out to you as, yes, this is gentrifying just as much as, over by 11th or just wherever, in like more traditional East Austin? Do you see those trends happening as well?
Very much. So my single member district as the trustee, I have all Montopolis, I have Old Tor, Wickersham, Olive Grove, and half of Riverside. The half of Riverside that I have is all student housing and all the new built apartments. And when I say new built, they're the ones with that city view skyline and that everybody wants. And their starting price point for a 1-bedroom studio is $1,500. My working families cannot afford $1,500. 10, 15, 20 years ago, when I grew up on Riverside, and I had asked my mom, because before we moved into the house I grew up in, I was like, Mom, how much was that apartment on Riverside that we used to live on when it was us three only? She was like, her 2-bedroom, 1 bath was no more than $600. Now we're talking late 90s, early 2000s. And I asked my grandparents, I was like, when y'all bought your house in the 80s on Montopolis, how much was it? And they're like, oh, we bought it for $33,000. And that community is still there. The ones that bought their home back in the 70s and 80s are still there. But am I seeing it gentrified as I am 11th Street, 7th Street? Yes, it's evolving. Now, when I was campaigning, I had to campaign to working professionals who do not have kids in my district, who don't care, who are 25 years old working for whatever company. And I had to convince them to vote for me. All the homeowners that moved into the neighborhood, I had to, all the out-of-state people specifically, I had to convince them to vote for me. I couldn't go walk in with a neighborhood charm. Hey, I'm from, remember, so-and-so and so-and-so, I'm their niece, I'm their nephew, I'm their son, grandson, brother, cousin. I couldn't do that with these people. I had to take a different approach. Um, so I am seeing it. I am seeing less families, more working professionals, and I am seeing less students. And that worries me a lot because this is not the same neighborhood. This is now evolving to not be the same neighborhood that I grew up in when I was a kid.
I'm glad you reminded me actually I meant to ask you earlier. So why the school board? Why this is pre-pandemic is what you said, but what made you decide that you wanted to run for this position?
Yeah. In the beginning, I wanted to volunteer. About a couple years ago, I had told myself, I want to volunteer. And it goes back to what I had said about college. I volunteered a lot and I didn't realize how much I had volunteered until after college. And so as I was looking to volunteer, I saw that a school board position was vacant. Now, I sat on that window. They gave a timeline of when they were accepting applicants and it closed. It passed and it closed. And I said, okay, no worries. But it reopened. And it just stayed on my mind. And I said, I meet the qualifications. I live in the area. There were certain requirements that you had to meet in order to be interviewed for the role. And I met all of them. And they asked me the same thing, like why the school board? You know, you have very limited to almost no political experience, but you have advocacy experience. So why the school board? And at the time, it was I want to help redirect stigmas of the district. I want to help redirect of the school district, redirect stigmas of the neighborhood. We're constantly seen as those kids. We're constantly seen as a setback, as not having an opportunity to the American dream with air quotes. I don't know what that means because I don't like that term. And it's because we are a working class Latino community. And I want to be part of an organization that was going to evolve that. And I was then appointed a couple weeks later to the role. But that meant my role at one point was going to have a term date. And that term date just happened to be this November. And I had a challenger. So then I made it back in July. So then I made a conscious decision. Do I let my seat go? Or do I continue fighting for what I said I wanted to join? So in the beginning, it was fighting stigmas, redirecting that negative outlook on the school district and the community at large and my individual community. Now it's ensuring that the community as from the school district, which is the parts of Austin into the Del Valle area, have a representation of themselves, have a representation of the school district, because I am a graduate from the school district. And also have, I lost my train of thought. Representation of themselves, representation of the school district. But more importantly, a voice for them, for the community to understand what they face. Like I said, I come from a working class family. That's the entire school district. You know, someone who I was very fortunate to see the odd jobs and the late nights that my parents had to work, my grandparents had to work, my aunts and uncles. I was very fortunate to see that. So now I'm able to make the decisions today on behalf of the school. I'm able to make decisions with the school board that impacts the school district and the community, because I know what they're facing at home. I experienced it firsthand. And then getting involved and then having the opportunity to be involved at a much larger scale with the coalitions, with different coalition groups, to ensure that our community at large, and at this point, it doesn't matter if you're Del Valle ISD, AISD, whatever ISD, that all students, all community members have access to PPE at this point. So I'm very thankful that, you know, the school board has led me into becoming more of a, I wouldn't say community leader, more of a community activist.
Do you plan to stick with it, with the school board?
For now, yes. For now, yes.
I
I enjoy it.
you have your sights on anything else? Is this a springboard to
No,
to another position, city council? No.
no. I like my little school board.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it sounds like, I mean, it sounds like you've been able to have an impact, right? I mean, is that, do you feel that way?
Yeah, I've been reached out by different people who recognize what I've done, and yes, it sounds like I have an impact. I sometimes tell myself I don't. Like I tell myself that I wish I could do more, or that how can I do more? I'm always asking when I when I do the events, when I'm volunteering, I'm always asking, what more do you need from me? I get there when they need me to, and I'm like the last one to leave, because I'm always asking, what else do you need work? Do you need to break down, set up? How can I help you? Because like I think I've said it before, I'm fortunate to have what I have because I had a really strong foundation, a really strong support system. But that doesn't mean everyone else does. And I want to ensure that mainly our students, and to the why the school board, I want our students to see that you can be from that side of town, go to be a graduate from that school district, be a Latino, speak more than one language, speak Spanish to your grandparents in public, also be gay, and still be successful in your individual life.
Well, I think that's a perfect note. That's a fine note to end it on, Damian.
Yeah.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you. I know you're busy. So thanks for all the work y'all are doing. It sounds really important, and I'm glad I was able to just see a little bit of it the other day. And thanks for speaking with us today.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you for having me. Thank you for asking the questions, and whatever I can do to help you and the program.
Thank you. Well, I'll follow up with an email later, but thank you.
All right, and you have a good night.
Have a good one. Bye.